The last time they saw her, she was 12, sold like livestock for $50 and a bottle of whiskey. Her family's home burned to ash. They told the town she died in those flames. But today, under the burning Arizona sun, she's back. Not as a girl, not as a ghost, as a storm they never saw coming. Scars line her neck like a map of survival. A silver locket dangles from her hand, the last trace of a mother they murdered. She doesn't scream, doesn't flinch, just speaks. I've come to collect my inheritance. And in that moment, every man who'd buried the truth realized she didn't come for revenge. She came for justice, and someone's going to pay. Let me tell you something. People tend to underestimate children. They think a frightened little girl won't remember, that when the night burns her world to ashes, she'll block out the screams, the blood, the betrayal. But some memories don't fade. Some carve themselves into your bones. Evelyn Cross was only 12 when her world was sold off in pieces. First, the fire, the choking smoke, her father's last cry. Then came the hands that dragged her from the rubble, their fingers rough, their eyes colder than steel. She saw Jed Hawthorne clearly that night. Saw the way he yanked her mother's necklace from her neck, torn away like it meant nothing. And she heard the price. $50, he said. That's all she's worth. Just $50. That's what her life was worth to them. Less than a good horse, less than a new coat. They called it business. She called it betrayal. And while they rode off richer, Evelyn was thrown into a wagon like cargo. But what they didn't understand, what they never saw coming, was that Evelyn wasn't just a frightened girl. She was remembering. She remembered the faces, the voices, the badge that looked away, the men who laughed, and the lie they told the town. That little Evelyn Cross had died in the fire. But she didn't die. She endured. And in that suffering, something was born. Not rage, at least not only rage, purpose. While they celebrated and built their hollow legacies on stolen land and stolen children, Evelyn was learning, watching, becoming. They thought the past had been buried, but Evelyn Cross was still out there, and she was coming, not as a victim, as a reckoning carved in scar tissue and memory. The years between 12 and 19 can shape a soul or shatter it. For Evelyn Cross, they did both. She wasn't given the chance to grow up soft. There were no birthday cakes, no warm blankets, no voices humming lullabies. What she got instead were bruises that bloomed like rot, hunger that carved out her ribs, and chains that rattled louder than any memory of home. But Evelyn didn't vanish into despair. She adapted. She didn't just survive, she observed, she calculated, she learned. She learned how to listen without breathing too loud, how to move in silence through the dark, memorizing the patterns of cruel men. She studied the routines of her captors, who drank, who gambled, who beat girls when no one was watching. She became fluent in the dialects of survival. She learned how to smile like a servant while noting every detail, names, scars, voices, vices. While the men around her treated her like nothing, she was collecting everything. Over time, Evelyn slipped free. Not all at once, but piece by piece. From one camp to another, she followed their maps. She forged names, earned rides, stole ledgers. She slipped into border towns unnoticed and emerged with knowledge no one dared to gather. By 16, she had tracked down 3 of the men who trafficked her across territories. She didn't kill them. She had a different plan. 3 years after her sale, Evelyn found Jeb Trask, a man who once spat in her direction as she cried in a wagon. He was living fat and slow under the name Curtis Lane near El Paso. He had a dog, a rocking chair, and a secret. Evelyn watched him for 4 days. Then one night, she slipped into his yard, knocked him unconscious, and chained him to a mesquite tree with iron cuffs. Pinned to his chest was a folded note with coordinates. She rode off before dawn. 2 days later, a federal marshal found him exactly where she said. She didn't want his blood. She wanted his name on paper, his confession on record. Because revenge fades. But evidence, that builds cases. And Evelyn Cross was just getting started. Copper Ridge hadn't changed. The buildings still leaned like tired old men. The paint peeled from shutters like forgotten promises. Dust rolled down the main street as if time itself had given up trying to clean this place. The same men occupied the same porches, muttering through cigarette smoke and pretending the past never happened. But Evelyn Cross had changed. She didn't ride in fast or loud. There was no gunfire, no thunder of hooves, just one lone rider on a sunburnt horse, moving with quiet purpose, as if drawn by something deeper than revenge. She wore no makeup. Her face was bare and unapologetic, a map of where she'd been. One scar crossed her neck like a silent reminder. Another was hidden beneath the collar of her coat. Her eyes didn't scan. They locked on. The boots she wore weren't clean. They whispered against the wooden saloon floor like old ghosts returning home. Her revolver hung low on her hip, heavy and familiar. Not a decoration, but a declaration. When she pushed open the saloon doors, every conversation died. Inside was a mix of sweat, whiskey, and fear. The kind that clings to your skin when truth walks in. And in the corner, seated like kings on borrowed thrones, were Jed Hawthorne and Royce Mallory. They didn't recognize her at first, not with the sun behind her and the years stretched between then and now. But then she spoke. Her voice wasn't loud. It didn't need to be. "I've come to collect my inheritance." Royce nearly dropped his glass. Jed stiffened in his seat, blood draining from his face as the weight of recognition hit. They had told the town Evelyn Cross died in the fire. They whispered it at night when guilt crept in. They buried it beneath wealth and whiskey. But here she stood, not a ghost, not a child. She had returned as consequence made flesh, something they couldn't silence. And suddenly Copper Ridge didn't feel so safe anymore. Evelyn Cross didn't return to Copper Ridge to start a gunfight. She came to deliver justice, openly, methodically, and without mercy. As the crowd gathered, drawn by whispers and tension that clung to the air like smoke, Evelyn stepped forward into the center of the street. She didn't stand on a platform, nor did she demand silence. She didn't need to. Everyone felt it. They watched as she placed something small and tarnished onto the table outside the saloon. A silver locket, dull with age but unmistakable in its engraving, MC Margaret Cross, her mother, the very locket Jed Hawthorne had ripped from Margaret's neck the night he cut her throat and set their home ablaze. Jed froze. His eyes locked onto the piece of jewelry like it was a ghost risen from the grave. His hand twitched near his belt, not for a weapon, but as if he might somehow rewind time. He couldn't, and Evelyn wasn't finished. From her saddlebag, she pulled out a worn leather folder. She didn't raise her voice or make a speech. She simply placed page after page on the table. Handwritten letters between Royce Mallory and unnamed buyers. Shipping manifests for cargo no decent man would ever trade. Payment records, routes, codes, names. Every document reeked of truth and guilt. The silence was louder than a gunshot. Then from behind her came the slow, deliberate steps of Deputy Marshal Thorne Maddox. His boots struck the dirt with purpose, his long coat brushing dust behind him as he approached the table. His badge caught the sunlight, and the crowd shifted uneasily. This wasn't just spectacle anymore. This was real, official. He stood beside Evelyn and unfolded a stack of papers from his coat. Seals, stamps, signatures, warrants. He nodded once, that was all. Royce Mallory laughed, but there was no humor in it. "You think you can walk in here, dump a few papers, and bring down a whole town?" Evelyn's reply was ice. "I'm not bringing down the town, just the men who thought it belonged to them." Royce's face darkened. "This is still Copper Ridge," he hissed. "People here don't care about—" "They will," she cut in, "when they see what's behind your doors, when they read what you wrote, when they find the names of their neighbors in these pages." Whispers rippled through the crowd. Doubt bloomed in once loyal faces. Even the bartender leaned out from the saloon, eyes narrowed in concern. Jed took a trembling step back. "She's lying," he spat. "None of this means anything." But his words fell flat as Maddox raised his voice. "Jed Hawthorne, Royce Mallory, you are both under federal arrest for human trafficking, conspiracy, and murder." Royce's hand twitched toward his belt, but Evelyn was faster. She didn't draw. She only stepped forward, and both men froze, Because they understood now. This wasn't vengeance. This was a trial. And the courtroom? It was the dirt beneath their boots, the sky above their heads, and the witnesses standing silently in every doorway. The sheriff wasn't coming. The money couldn't save them. And for the first time in 7 years, the truth had arrived. Just when the air in Copper Ridge had begun to settle, another storm rode in. This one not of wind or fire, but of power in its purest, most dangerous form. A sleek black horse clattered into the square. Its rider, dressed in a crisp black coat and polished boots, dismounted with deliberate ease. His silver badge gleamed beneath the midday sun, and behind a pair of wire spectacles, his cold eyes scanned the crowd with the calm detachment of a man who had seen empires rise and fall, mostly by his own hand. Judge Vernon Kincaid. He wasn't a sheriff or a local businessman. He was the man who pulled strings from behind polished desks and velvet drapes. He'd never dirtied his hands, but his fingerprints were everywhere. He approached slowly, boots crunching over gravel, stopping just short of the makeshift table where Evelyn Cross stood, surrounded by documents, witnesses, and truth. "I expected more restraint from you, Miss Cross," he said smoothly, his voice cultured and condescending. "You think this ends here? With 2 small-town criminals and a pocket full of accusations?" He smiled, calm and composed. "The network is bigger than you could ever imagine. You don't destroy something like this with one folder." Evelyn didn't blink. Instead, she reached into her coat and withdrew a second ledger. Thicker, heavier, bound in worn leather. She placed it on the table and opened it. Inside, dozens of pages, recorded conversations from servants, copies of contracts, coded communications between cities, lists of bribes, and transfers traced back to one central name: Kincaid's. Dozens of times. His signature, his handwriting, his voice. The judge's smirk faltered. "Those are forged," he said, quieter now. Evelyn didn't respond. She didn't need to. Deputy Marshal Thorne Maddox stepped forward, his badge flashing. "Judge Vernon Kincaid," he said, unrolling a parchment, "you are hereby placed under federal arrest. This warrant comes from Washington. Your position is suspended, effective immediately." Kincaid's eyes widened, not with fear but with disbelief. "You think you've won?" he hissed. "Take me, and another man replaces me tomorrow. There are dozens more." Evelyn stepped closer, her voice low but razor sharp. "Then I'll find them too." Kincaid had spent years hiding behind his name, his influence, and his power. But today, none of that mattered. Because power isn't protection when the truth is loud enough. And Evelyn Cross had just torn down his empire with a pen, a ledger, and the kind of patience that can outlast empires. His network wasn't untouchable, it was documented, and now exposed. The walls were closing in. Jed Hawthorne had been exposed. Judge Kincaid was in cuffs. The townspeople were whispering, some in shock, others in shame. But Royce Mallory wasn't ready to fall. He scanned the crowd, his eyes wide and desperate. The smooth-talking predator had been reduced to a cornered animal. He saw a way out, not through logic or law, but through fear, the very same tool he had used for years. In a flash, he lunged toward the edge of the crowd and seized a young girl by the arm, no older than 10, trembling in a faded dress. Before anyone could react, he yanked her close and pressed a blade to her throat. Gasps tore through the street. A mother screamed. The girl froze, her small fingers shaking as she clutched at Royce's sleeve, eyes wide with terror. "Nobody move," he barked. "Let me walk now, or she dies. Just like that Cross brat should have." The name landed like a slap. But Evelyn Cross didn't flinch. She stood still, her eyes locked on his. Her fingers didn't twitch toward her holster. Her breath didn't quicken. Her calm was terrifying. "You taught me fear," she said quietly, "but you never taught me how to run from it." Royce's grip tightened. "I'll do it." Still, Evelyn didn't blink. And then, in one smooth, practiced motion, she drew her revolver and fired. The shot cracked through the air, echoing off every building in town. The bullet struck Royce cleanly in the shoulder, forcing his body to twist and drop. He cried out, releasing the girl as he crashed to the ground. The child bolted into the crowd, straight into the arms of her mother, who held her with a sob. Royce rolled on the dirt, clutching his wound, blood seeping through his fingers. The crowd stood frozen, not because of the gunshot, but because of what they had just witnessed. They had seen the girl they thought had died, the child who once begged for mercy on her knees, now standing unshaken, her revolver steady, her eyes blazing not with rage, but with resolve. Royce looked up at her from the ground, his voice cracked and trembling. "You're no better than us." But Evelyn stepped forward and holstered her gun. "No," she said, "I'm not like you at all." And for the first time in Copper Ridge, they saw her not as a ghost from a buried past, not as a victim or a fugitive, but as something far more dangerous. Justice made flesh. The town square had never seen so much silence. The dust hung in the air like it was afraid to settle. The sun cast long shadows as federal agents finished the job Evelyn Cross had started, clasping cold iron around the wrists of men who once believed they owned Copper Ridge. Jed Hawthorne was still muttering curses through bloodied lips. Royce Mallory, his shoulder bandaged and soul crushed, stared at the ground. Judge Vernon Kincaid refused to speak at all, his silence now a prison of its own. The townspeople looked on, no longer certain where to place their loyalty. Some were ashamed, others stunned. A few turned their faces away, unable to meet Evelyn's gaze. But she wasn't looking for approval. She stepped forward, past the men now cuffed and disarmed, and turned her attention to the crowd. Her voice wasn't raised. It didn't have to be. It carried with the weight of truth. "There are 42 families," she said softly, "who never learned what happened to their children." The words landed like thunder in a still canyon. They weren't runaways. They weren't forgotten. They were stolen, traded, broken. She reached into her saddlebag once more and pulled out a thick portfolio, its edges frayed, its cover stained from long nights and longer rides. She placed it into Marshal Thorne Maddox's hands without ceremony. "This isn't for revenge," she told him. "It's for answers." He nodded once, the kind of nod that comes not from authority, but from respect. There was no applause, no celebration. Evelyn didn't ask for it. She walked slowly to her horse, tightening the worn leather strap, adjusting the saddle with quiet precision. She mounted without flair. She paused only once, looking out across the faces she remembered as a girl. Faces that once turned away. Faces that had forgotten her. Faces that now saw her for the first time. And she saw something new in them too. Fear, yes, but also awe. Because the girl they sold, the child they let vanish, the name they erased from town records, had returned not as a ghost, but as the reckoning they never expected. Evelyn didn't wave. A shopkeeper whispered to no one. "We should have listened when she screamed." Another voice, softer still. "Maybe now someone will." And behind her the town stayed still, hushed by the weight of what they'd seen. Some prayed, some wept, and some finally remembered. Because when justice leaves quietly, it leaves a silence that can never be forgotten. No one saw Evelyn Cross leave Copper Ridge. By sunrise, the trail was already cold. The town stirred slowly, unsure if the events of the day before had been real or some fevered dream. But the shackles on the criminals, the folded documents in Marshal Maddox's hands, and the silence left behind said otherwise. She was gone, but her work wasn't. Some said she joined the marshals, that she now rode under a silver badge, hunting the remnants of the network she'd exposed. Others whispered she became something else, something not bound by law or rank, a shadow in the desert, moving from town to town, following whispers, chasing the rot hiding beneath polite smiles. What no one disputed was this: the evidence never stopped. Week after week, government outposts across 3 territories began receiving anonymous parcels, envelopes sealed in wax, filled with names, coordinates, payment trails, and testimonies. Each package led to new arrests. Each one carried truth sharp enough to cut through even the most fortified lies. At the bottom of each file was a single initial, scrawled in tight, slanted handwriting. EC. Where silence had ruled, she brought voices. Where darkness had taken root, she brought fire. Near Santa Fe, During a rainstorm that turned roads to rivers, a rancher named Elias Monroe answered a knock at his door. A woman stood there, soaked to the bone, cloak torn, revolver holstered. In her arms was a child, barely breathing, feverish, eyes wide with terror. Slung across her shoulder was a folder sealed tight with string. She said nothing. Elias, a widower, took them in without question, fed the child, dried their clothes, stoked the fire. By dawn, the woman was gone. No trace, not even an imprint on the pillow. But by mid-afternoon, 3 men from the nearby town were in custody, men long rumored to be involved in midnight business. The girl? She grew up free. She now runs a school in Santa Fe. And the woman who saved her? Never seen again. Some say Evelyn Cross became a myth. But to those who still waited for justice, she was something more. A promise that monsters don't always win, and sometimes the lost come back, not to be saved, but to save someone else. This was never about vengeance. It was never about rage or blood or satisfying the hunger for revenge that so many expected of her. No, Evelyn Cross's journey was about memory, because the world, this cruel, silent, grinning world, is built by men who count on people forgetting the faces of the lost, forgetting the screams no one answered, forgetting the crimes buried beneath wealth, silence, and well-polished shoes. But Evelyn didn't forget. She remembered every face, every name, every lie. And she turned that memory into something sharper than any blade, more precise than any bullet. She proved something most people don't want to believe, that remembrance, when sharpened with purpose, can be a weapon. She didn't return to Copper Ridge for herself. She didn't seek applause or titles or redemption. She came back for those who never could, the children buried in ledgers, the girls traded like livestock, the mothers who screamed as fire swallowed their homes and their hope. She came back for the forgotten, and in doing so, she became unforgettable. But justice, true justice, comes with a cost. It doesn't make you whole. It doesn't stitch the wounds or erase the nightmares. It just sets the record straight, even if only for a moment. Evelyn knew that. She accepted it. She lost her family, her childhood, her safety, her name. And she gave away what little piece she had left so that others could one day have theirs. Because someone had to. Someone had to hold the line between what people get away with and what they should answer for. Someone had to remind the powerful that even if the world forgets, someone always remembers. So maybe Evelyn Cross isn't a marshal. Maybe she's not even a hero. Maybe she's just a woman with scars, a revolver, and a memory too sharp to fade. But if there's one thing she's taught us, it's this. Justice doesn't always ride in with banners and horns. Sometimes it arrives quietly, wearing dust-covered boots, carrying folders instead of guns. Sometimes justice rides alone, and sometimes, just sometimes, justice has a name, and that name is Evelyn Cross. Evelyn Cross lived in another time, but her voice still echoes in ours. Because some stories never really end. They just find new listeners. But her story still echoes through the world we live in today. Because the truth is, there are still voices that go unheard. There are still people who suffer in silence. And there are still those who build their power on the backs of the forgotten, counting on the rest of us to look away. But justice doesn't begin in courtrooms. It begins with remembrance, with refusing to forget, with standing up, even when it's uncomfortable, even when it's quiet. Evelyn reminded us that one voice, armed with truth and perseverance, can uncover the darkest lies. She didn't ask for revenge. She asked for answers. And maybe today, in our own towns, families, and communities, we can do the same. So here's a question for you. Do you believe that justice still matters in a world so quick to move on? Do you think someone like Evelyn would be heard today, or would she be ignored all over again? Tell me in the comments. I want to hear your thoughts, your stories, your reflections, especially if you're someone who has seen both the beauty and the cruelty of life unfold over the years. And if this story meant something to you, if it stirred something deep, please consider giving this video a like, subscribing to the channel, and sharing it with someone who might need to hear it. Because stories like Evelyn's don't just teach us about the past, They help us change the future. Thank you for listening. And until next time, stay kind, stay strong, and never stop remembering. Because memory isn't weakness, it's our greatest weapon.